Welcome back to the Conservation Made Simple podcast. I'm Logan.
And I'm Cameron.
And we thought that this week, with everything that's been going on in 2020 in the news cycle with COVID, wildfires, everything in the election cycle, there's been a lot of great things going on around the world that people haven't necessarily had the chance to learn about because of all the craziness of this year. So
all these huge news stories
that in any other year would have been in the news for a month are now daily. We wanted to bring in all these great things that have been happening. So I'm going to take 5 stories over the last 10 months. Cameron's going to take 5 stories. And we're kind of going to teach each other about all these incredible both human acts and also just happenstance that have been going on through the year. So my first one is from January, and it's from the Good News Network, titled "Dutch Guy Famous for Cleaning Up Pacific Garbage Patch is Now Clearing the World's Rivers Too."
I love the title every time we say it.
Me too.
We've admittingly redone this filming like 4 times now, and every time we get to this first story, I'm like, "Dutch guy fixes." I'm like, I love this. It's such a great title.
So if you don't know who Boyan Slat is, you should learn. He's this incredible young engineer responsible for basically this organization called Ocean Cleanup that's been working for the last 3 years or more, creating, collecting 2 shipping containers full of trash from the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And after having success there, they wanted to go to the actual source of all this trash, which is the rivers, and engineer something to stop it there so that you don't even have to go into the ocean in the future and continue to clean it up. We can be working in both places. And so, again, I love the name of everything that comes from the Ocean Cleanup, but this new device that they've created is called the Interceptor, which is great because it sounds beautiful, and that's literally its job, is to intercept trash. And so basically, it's this conveyor belt that'll go across only half of the stream, and it'll switch between sides of the stream over time and collect trash. And they've done studies that can show that it'll extract 220,000 pounds of trash per day. Absolutely insane.
It's a lot.
And their goal is to have each of these interceptors in all 1,000 of the world's worst polluting rivers by 2025. And this new product is scalable, it's easily manufactured, and they're doing work to make sure that it's available in poorer countries where pollution is at its worst, because waste disposal is a lot less developed than most Western countries, which is really great.
Yeah. I think one of the coolest things about these stories that we had picked out, and I only know them from your titles, but everything kind of relates back to some of our earlier pods, which we didn't do on purpose. I know I have one. You just did one on single-use items. I have one on nuclear. We have another one that has to do with plastic.
Yeah.
This insane, coincidental, if you want to say, makeup of all of these stories.
It's almost like conservation is timely right now.
Almost. With coincidences, let me go into February for an article from the Smithsonian Magazine titled "Can Disease Sniffing Dogs Save the World's Citrus?" Now, citrus is a huge industry.
Yeah.
Florida here in the U.S. is actually the second largest citrus industry in the world.
Wow.
Or citrus location, however you want to phrase it. And right now, citrus is facing this thing called Huanglongbing, which I'm sure I'm butchering, and I've said it differently every time I've tried to say it. Also called citrus greening, and it's a devastating and wildly infectious bacterial disease that's going from tree to tree to tree to tree, targeting citrus.
Wow.
Now, from the name, you may have figured out that it was first described and named in China in the early 1900s and is now spread to over 50 countries in the world, the US being one of them. The hardest part about this is that trees are somewhat asymptomatic until they're dead. They don't really show any signs, and then all of a sudden they stop producing fruit and then keel over.
Wow.
Can't really treat anything if you don't know it's not there. Not going to say what that sounds like, but just saying that this is something that they've been battling, trying to figure out. Not only can you separate, they're working on the technical side of separating genomes and figuring out, can we get to the elements that are actually the disease and then, reverse it and get to the cure. But at the same time, finding ways to detect it earlier and earlier. Now, even if you're scraping bark or taking out from the middle of the tree, it's near impossible for science to find any source of disease for a couple of years. But we've now switched to dogs. And these dogs are now able to do it within weeks.
Game changer.
Game changer. Now, it doesn't change the fact that we still have no way to treat it. So as soon as we've located a tree that is sick, you can just remove it. And I think the training of dogs is one of the coolest things because they're all trained somewhat in the same sense that you'll train any animal. And you should train any animal, which is positive reinforcement.
Yep.
So they'll say, okay, this tree is sick, and we know that 100%. You train that dog to say this is what it smells like, and then you take a tree that you know is clean, and you say this is not what it smells like. So they get rewards for the reactive behavior that they have. So sometimes it's sitting or barking, depends on the dog and the trainer. And they're able to then pick out which trees are sick. So they started infecting certain groves on purpose, just random trees. And the dogs within, like I said, a month were able to figure out every single tree that was infected and avoid all the trees that weren't. So a 99%, I think there was one dog that messed up one time, but there was 99% effective within 1 month to identify the 60 trees or so that were infected. Crazy.
That's absolutely insane.
Now, the hard part about this, and I know we're doing the good news, but I do want to say that this is still the very forefront of the idea because as dogs get easily distracted, they just start running through these groves and they're picking out trees. There's a potential that they could start picking out trees that we don't know are infected or not. This was helpful because we knew which ones specifically were sick. But as soon as you start releasing them into places that you have no idea, they can start picking out healthy trees and you're cutting those down and missing other ones.
Sure.
And you're not going to know until years later that was inaccurate. But if you can figure it out, then it's a cheap way for a farmer to be able to have one of these dogs trained on hand and released through the grove, once a week or so. And we could basically revert that because, like I said, Florida right now, second largest, and it's on the tipping point of crashing. So that's for February.
Even if it's not 100% accurate, super great for crisis remediation.
Yes.
Which feeds into our amazing news for March, which is from Inhabitat.com, titled Scientists Close to Creating Artificial Photosynthesis, which is crazy cool that we've gotten to the point where we can take this super cellular natural process and use it to our own benefit. So for anybody who isn't super in the science field, photosynthesis is the chemical reaction where plants and algae basically take carbon dioxide and energy from the sun, and they create fuel for themselves in the form of sugars. And scientists at Berkeley have designed basically these fuel tiles that have minuscule pieces of thin flexible silicate, and in those tiny little pieces of algae that comprise this artificial photosynthesis system. And
say that 3 times.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad I got it right the first time. Scientists are on the cusp of being able to use this new artificial photosynthesis system to generate renewable energy from the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. So not only would it be creating new fuel for ourselves, but it would also be reducing all the carbon that's creating climate change. And that's super important right now. According to Heinz Frey from the Berkeley lab, there are 2 challenges that have not yet been met. One of them is scalability. If we want to keep fossil fuels in the ground, we need to be able to make energy in terawatts, which is a lot of energy.
Yeah.
And you need to make a fuel that is a liquid hydrocarbon fuel so that you can actually use it with the trillions of dollars worth of existing infrastructure and technology. So basically, the really exciting part about this new system is that we would be able to burn it in cars, but it would be naturally sourced, and because it's just sugars, it would not be as bad for the environment.
That's sweet.
Super cool.
Yeah, you gotta play the infrastructure that's already there, and I will touch on that again on my October one for nuclear. But.
Yep.
Well, for April, I have from The Guardian. The title was "Edible Insects Set to be Approved by EU in, quote, breakthrough moment." Now, edible insects is very much a taboo subject in Western culture. I know I've talked about it before that I've eaten edible insects, not as much anymore, but it was something that I was trying to make my main meat source to be edible insects. Well, the EU kind of has a different method of how they monitor what foods, just across the board, what foods are acceptable in restaurants, which ones aren't. The idea is that if you were to today go open up a restaurant there, they'll say, yeah, here's some categories like carrots. You can serve carrots, and here are the criteria to make sure that you can serve them. So as long as you fit within that, you can serve carrots in any capacity you want. It can be by itself or within a dish or a broth or whatever. Edible insects have always been, up to this point, although accepted in some restaurants, they've never had that checklist that it can be any way you want. It's been, here's the dish I want. Is this acceptable? So every single little dish is needing to be approved. And then on top of that, there's just so much laws and restrictions around the production and distribution and sale of edible insects. So this breakthrough moment of approving by the EU is supposed to make it where they're able to then say, okay, you know what? Whole or ground mealworms, lesser mealworms, locusts, crickets, and grasshoppers are the target items. We'll get that characteristic of, okay, you can serve it however you want as long as it is, say, environmentally, sound. It is safe to eat by these criteria, so on and so forth. Which I think would be really cool to start seeing that twist.
Yeah.
And there's already, I think I saw 5 or 6 huge industries of edible insects in the EU that are already starting to get ready to ramp up for even more production of this. And there's many restaurants that are looking at converting to somewhat of a larger edible insect menu.
Wow.
Which is crazy.
That's exciting because they're creating regulations so that it's safe for people to eat, but it also kind of normalizes it.
Yes. I think that's the important piece of this, is that if it's next to your burger or it's next to your salad on the menu, you'll start looking at it as like, oh, it's not as weird.
Yeah.
Granted, I know it still sounds weird. And
but
I think a lot of people, I would just encourage you to go try it.
Yeah.
They're not that bad.
Tastes like chicken.
I wouldn't go that far. They don't taste like chicken, but they don't taste that gross.
Cool.
Depending, and you can also get them seasoned. And my favorite, if I can throw it out there, is black ants. They just taste like lime.
Really?
Just straight up lime.
All right.
So if you put it on like tacos or something like that, it's just lime juice. But have fun with it. Experiment.
Yeah.
Let them know I sent you.
Well, speaking of...
No segue for that one.
Oh, no, there is actually.
Speaking of insects.
Speaking of things that humans eat and kind of that whole realm, I have an article from fastcompany.com, and it's titled, "This New Probiotic Makes Cow Burps Less Damaging to the Climate." I have the best titles in this, I think.
You do. 100%.
So, again, a little science behind what we're talking about. Methane is a really potent greenhouse gas, and it traps heat in the atmosphere 25 times more effectively than CO2. And that's according to the EPA and the IPCC, so super reputable sources. It's also the molecule that created the hole in the ozone that was huge like 10 years ago. Now it's closing because we've been doing good work, but the more methane we cut down, the more we help global warming and climate change. And so this new garlic-based dietary supplement that's being given to cows has shown in 2 different studies to reduce the methane content in cow belches by 30 to 38%, which could help reduce the 2.6% of American greenhouse gas volume produced from cattle ranching, which is huge. Super funny. I never thought that I would be talking about cow belches on this podcast, but here we are.
And people, you guys didn't know you were listening to cow belches on your way to work today, or on your walk, or whatever it is that you're doing.
Yep.
Here you are. Cow burps is the conversation.
Cow burps is the conversation. And just to give credit where credit's due, Mutrol is the Switzerland-based company, which will likely be celebrating their supplement success. And due to the success of both of these studies, and just a little bit of background, because kind of interesting, the startup came as a result of examining garlic's antimicrobial effect on the human diet. So figuring out how it's been good for us, smart humans thought that, maybe it'll be helpful in cows too. And it's been shown to be successful. So that's super exciting. Fighting against all of the methane that gets put out by the incredible amount of cattle ranching that we do in the US and around the world.
The one thing that I'm taking away from this is that cow's breath is about to get even worse.
Better for the environment.
Better for the
Worse
environment.
For us.
Worse for us. So if you've been getting close to cattle, enjoy those hugs before this kicks in. Oh, man. For June, I have an article from the World at Large, and the title was "These Women Farm Sea Sponges in Zanzibar, Diversifying Income and Giving Fish a Break." Cool. Now, if you don't already know, this community of Jambiani, Zanzibar, I don't know why I got all the big names, they have been mostly relying on seaweed for income and also fishing for food. And that combination, we could go through the list of things that are going wrong with that, but with ocean acidification, overfishing, many, many things going on in the ocean, these two industries are starting to see somewhat of a collapse. And there's also another disease that's infecting seaweed, which I didn't even have time to cover today. But right now, this organization called Marine Cultures is looking to start sponge farms. Well, not looking to start, they have been starting sponge farms in Zanzibar. They can do about 3 to 4 sponge farms a year, and each farm can produce enough income for 2 to 3 families to live very comfortably. Be able to bring in electricity, build their own home, send kids off to school, like really comfortably. And it's better than they have ever been getting with the fish and the seaweed. On top of this, so the sea sponges are used for both loofahs, which I was talking to Logan about this earlier. I said, have you ever actually seen a natural sea sponge loofah? Because all I've seen are the plastic ones, which I think shows more of our dependence on plastic than anything else. But it's also you could use it for removing makeup, paint. There's a lot of things that you can use sea sponges for. But they're also selling to the international aquarium trade, which I think is pretty cool.
That is cool.
Now, one of the things that they were saying is, for an update from when this first came out in June, I got another update in this, that as the knowledge of how to do farming, which naturally as any new production is, their knowledge is getting better, their production of stuff is actually getting more and more. So they're starting to think that they may be able to scale it to a point where each farm could be producing enough for 6 to 8 families. Wow. Which would be great, because then
massive.
You're not only doubling each farm in terms of what it can produce with the same amount of sponges in it, but you're able to make a greater impact in that community, which has its own amazing amazing trickle-down effects. It has some amazing effects. There it is. That's just really good for that community. Like I said, they're facing some serious issues in that, which, again, more to it. But the positive side of it is that this organization is bringing in sea sponges for farming.
And
sustainable farming.
And it's sustainable, right? Because you can take any little part of a sponge and it can just become a whole new sponge.
Yeah. And
so
it was
cool.
One of the things is it's not, they're starting these farms, and it's kind of a line or I guess a line is the best way to phrase it. underwater, and then these sponges are attached to it. So we're not talking about like them going out to these coral reefs or whatever and then just plucking sponges off of them.
Yep.
But it's planted, grown, and then harvested as any crop that you can think of, like corn. Same thing. So
Super exciting.
But there you go for June.
Yeah, so for July, I have an article from The Guardian titled Red Kites Are Making a Comeback. And actually for July, I have two because they're related and they're both exciting. And red kites are basically a type of falcon. And they've basically created this really groundbreaking reintroduction success in England because in 1990, there were virtually no red kites left in England, which led to 13 of them being transported from Spain and released into the England wild. And so the beautiful success story is that today there are nearly 2,000 breeding pairs of red kites throughout the countryside. And it gives the English government high hopes for their 25-year environmental plan, which includes reintroductions of several species that have environmental benefits. And so it's always great to see a conservation story that works. That the work that we're doing and the conservation around the world are doing is being successful. So the second one is from National Geographic and is titled A Rare Dolphin in Pakistan is Rebounding.
A rare. I heard aware. And I'm like, an aware dolphin is coming back.
A rare dolphin.
Flipper is back, boys.
Should I go back?
No.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so the Indus dolphin in Pakistan has had a rough run. And basically that's due to industrial development, particularly dams. And they historically migrated far and wide, but they're now limited to about 20% of what was once their historical habitat. But wait, this is good news in July, right?
But wait,
so thanks to conservation efforts and including educating local communities and banning hunting, stranded dolphins are now being rescued and the population is on the rise. So they've created a community buy-in and it's working. Now there's 1,987 Indus dolphins in Pakistan, which is an increase of 132 since the 1970s, which for a big animal like this is a big growth.
Yeah, for mammals.
So, yeah, that's super exciting.
That's really cool. Yeah, if for those that don't fully understand conservation programs like this and how hard it is for mammals to come back, a lot of times it's because of slow reproductive rates or the births will have issues and there's so many elements that come with it. Plus you were talking about hunting and it's a large mammal, so there's more food that needs to be.
Absolutely.
A lot of elements. So for something like that to come back, like the kites is cool. I won't downgrade that.
Yeah.
But for a dolphin species to come back
massive
is huge.
Yeah.
And that gives me hope
Pun
for
intended.
Some of the other yes, it gives me hope for some of the other dolphin species or large marine mammal species that are also facing some smaller numbers.
Yeah.
Like the Vaqueta in Mexico.
Yep.
Baja Cal. Somewhat of the same thing.
Basically.
So for August, I have from the Fast Company. For August, I have from the Fast Company an article called "This California Highway is Now Paved with Plastic." Not gold. Plastic. Bad jokes. I'm going to redo that. For August, I have the Fast Company has an article called "This California Highway is Now Paved with Plastic," which is this highway was in Orville, California, and it is the first repaved road in the U.S. that has part plastic elements. Now, when you're talking about repaving, what does that mean? I'm so glad you asked. Repaving, and especially here in California, we're not in California. In California, their method is a repave as you go. So the machine basically rips up the top layer of the asphalt, grinds it up, takes in new elements. So in this case, it was part plastic, still a little bit of asphalt. Mixes the two together and then repaves it back onto the road.
Wow.
So you're not talking about having to rip stuff off, ship it out, ship in new stuff, and then repave. And so you have the same amount of output as you had input. This, you are actually ripping it up in place, which is great for the emissions that come from it because you're not driving these huge trucks back and forth.
Yeah.
And in this case, a 3-lane road, which is what it was, uses approximately 150,000 plastic bottles in a mile.
Wow.
It's a lot of bottles.
That is a lot of bottles.
Now,
and it's reuse, not recycling.
It's even better because it's going to be now in that ground forever and a useful in the ground,
Absolutely.
not, out in a landfill.
Yep.
The best part about this is because of the fact that it's built off of plastic, it is actually 2 to 3 times stronger and resists potholes and cracking better than original normal roads that we are facing.
Wow. Only benefits.
And because of how California is doing it, they're recycling the road that's already in place too. So there's virtually no waste happening in this, and you're repaving a road, which is obviously needed as you get a lot of people on it, especially for California and their traffic, and you're utilizing these bottles. So I wanted to go a step further, and I went 150,000 plastic bottles. That's awesome, but I mean, we use a lot of bottles in the US.
We do.
We use 35 billion plastic bottles per year to be exact.
Wow.
Or estimated, probably.
Yeah, probably more.
So you go 35 billion plastic bottles. Well, if we were to do about 150,000, and again, my math is based off of a 3-lane road, which I know a lot of roads are 2-lane. There's also a lot of highways that are more than 3. So I'm hoping it kind of evens out. There are about 4.3 million miles of roads in the US. So when you work out all the math there, that means that if we converted roads, if we had to convert all plastic bottles into roads, only 0.00096% of roads would need to incorporate plastic to eliminate all of our plastic bottles.
That's groundbreaking.
Literally. It is literally putting our plastic into roads and infrastructure that we're using consistently, and you wouldn't have to worry about it. Now, I also on here repaving a road, because this can last upwards of 4 or 5 years before you need to repave it anyways. That statistic's obviously a little off because that's just for the 1 year of 35 billion bottles. But even if you were to multiply that and then account for me having some terrible math on the amount of width of roads, you're still looking at less than 0.3 or 0.225 or whatever % of roads in the US that would be converted to this to eliminate all of our plastic bottle waste.
Wow.
So it's possible.
It is possible
to remove one of the biggest issues for, plastic waste.
We just need innovative solutions.
And this is
one of them.
That is one of the things that really gets me excited about this is imagine what we can do for all of the other one-time use items that we have.
Absolutely.
And if we can incorporate those, the Tide containers for your laundry. Think about just packaging for your food from the grocery store. If you can get those plastics to also be elements that are used in this, you, in theory, could basically be using plastic as the item to use in repaving roads.
Wow.
Now, I know that's a little bit higher than, what I know how to do. So it may not be totally possible to use every element of it. But I think it's
been shown in small practice as possible. That's a beautiful theory if we could put it into practice.
Yeah. And then, who knows? Well, maybe we'll end up like, as we talked in our single-use items, that there are some places in the world that are reducing the amount of landfills that they have, including Germany, which is basically at 0 functioning landfills. We can maybe all get there.
We could.
So that's my August news, and I think it's pretty insane.
So perfect transition to September is that the Science Daily put out an article recently called Plastic Enzyme Eating Cocktail Heralds New Hope for Plastic Waste.
Sounds disgusting.
Usually plastic cocktail, I would agree, super gross. This one, groundbreaking. And it comes from the study published by Professor John McGeehan, who's the director for the Center of Enzyme Innovation at the University of Portsmouth, and Dr. Greg Beckham, who's the Senior Research Fellow at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And a little background for the last time, PET is the most common thermoplastic. It's used in things like single-use drink bottles, clothing, carpets, and it takes hundreds of years to break down in the environment. But PETase can shorten this time to days. But that's not even the enzyme cocktail that we're talking about, because that was already invented. They've taken it a step farther, and the same team who re-engineered this plastic-eating enzyme PETase now have made a cross of it with the enzyme MHETase, and it was basically used to generate much bigger improvements. Simply mixing PETase with MHETase doubled the speed of PET breakdown, and engineering a concoction between the two enzymes to create this new super enzyme that increased the activity by a further 3 times. So even though PETase was already able to break it down in days, now it can do it even shorter, which is world-shattering, because can you imagine all of our landfills filled with plastic being able to just put this enzyme into the environment, controlled, and have it break down all of the garbage.
Keyword control. That
Keyword
was
control.
As soon as you're like, let's just release it to the world.
So
I was like,
maybe
yeah,
not.
anything called a super enzyme is probably not good for the environment.
Yeah.
I could probably name 4 movies. They're like, this will be great for the environment. We'll release it, and then the thing comes back to haunt.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. That's insane, though.
Yeah.
I mean, days. Something that took years.
Hundreds of years.
Yeah, almost 1,000 years.
Yeah, multiple
which
lifetimes.
We've talked in our single-use items pod. Just, I mean, wow, could you imagine? And, I mean, we're already using it in our roads, too, so you double all of this. Which is another reason you can't release it to the environment.
Yeah,
because if we start using it in our roads,
combine them,
we just lost our
trouble.
roads. So for our last month here of October, I have an article from Live Science called Nuclear Fusion Reactor Could Be Here as Soon as 2025. A couple years away. So nuclear fusion. Now, if that really scares you, I would encourage you to go back to our episode where we talked about nuclear power. It's not as scary as it sounds. It is an element that if it's used in a really controlled manner, then it's not talking about these nuclear bombs or like accidents like Chernobyl. Though could potentially happen, is very unlikely.
Also, just want to say that that's nuclear fission, and this is nuclear fusion, which makes things come together versus apart. So you're not necessarily making an explosion, you're creating plasma. So there should be no fear around it.
Yes.
As long as,
Yes. So this machine, like I said, or like you've said, like we've both said, is completely different than what we've already been working with. Mm-hmm. So not only are we trying to shift away from coal, but this would shift even farther away from other sources like wind and solar, which we've talked about could be problematic. Now, this machine can create 20 times more energy than it consumes. It doesn't create greenhouse gas. It does not have any other pollutants. And the fuel for it is hydrogen. So it's like super plentiful and would have enough for humans times 2 for millions of years.
Wow.
With no issues of ever running out, as we do with coal, or we've talked about some places don't get wind, some places don't get sun. Not a sustainable practice. This is extremely sustainable. Now, this would be the first device that would be creating, like you had said, for burning plasma. And it basically is something that doesn't create or doesn't need new energy continuously imported because it starts creating its own energy. And we're all actually really familiar with burning plasma because it's what a star is. Mm-hmm. A star is literally burning plasma. So our sun is burning plasma, which means if you've connected these dots, we are bringing stars to Earth and creating stars that will then power us.
We live in a sci-fi world.
We live in a sci-fi world. Now, although this is something that would only be producing heat, the idea is that once we've created it, hopefully in 2025, they can start studying it and shifting it to then do electricity by 2035 with a whole different machine. So it's going to take a little bit longer than the 2025. But what's great about this is that you won't have to restructure our electrical grids, which is one of the biggest issues with wind and solar, because it doesn't fit with the system. This fits the system. And like you had said earlier with one of your other news stories, this is something that can be powering our cars, powering our homes, powering the factories, literally powering everything to a point where we're creating no runoff, no extra gases,
no emissions,
no byproduct, which is incredible.
And all we have to do is get it going and then make sure it stays stable and we're good.
Yes. And so I thought, well, that's awesome. And as I was reading that article, there was another article right below it that's on the same topic that I wanted to also talk about. So still from Live Science, it says nearly 30 years after Chernobyl disaster, wildlife returns to the area. So Chernobyl, if you're not familiar with that, was a huge explosion of a nuclear power plant that went horribly wrong. And now after 30 years, moose, deer, and boar are seen in the area coming back.
Wow.
Radiation is still really bad. Not recommended for humans to go in. There are some that will go in once in a while, but it's not recommended. And the thought is, as much as it is a super nice story that they're coming back, that it's more of the absence of humans, that they're trying to avoid people to go to these areas, not that it's necessarily good for them to be coming back. So, you know, take it as a good story, but also like, they're really just avoiding us. But still an interesting story. I think it's really cool to see that nature does bounce back to some degree faster than we may have anticipated, because they were thinking maybe another 30 years before this would be happening. So for big animals like that to be coming back is great. So
super exciting.
That is our positive news of 2020. I hope that was enjoyable.
Yeah.
Because of the chaos that's happening in the world, and especially after the elections here last week. So much going on. And like we said at the beginning, all of these links, so if you want to read the entire article, will be in our Facebook group. So make sure that you're looking at that. And I loved how a lot of these built off of our previous episodes. So if you're just now finding us and you're just now listening to these episodes, we would encourage you, please go back and listen to some of our original content. And here's some of these stories a little bit larger, like nuclear power.
Yep. And yeah, I just want to say that these stories are so inspiring because human-created problems need human-created solutions. And these are them. We have the possibilities to make the changes that we need to make.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that, you know I tease a lot of things on our podcast, on our social media of like what we want to get to in the future. One of the things that we're trying to develop, which is going to be something that we can't do anytime soon because of the amount of money it would take to try to do. I have this entire industry, or not really an industry, but this idea to bring in a news network that's around environmental news that has these types of stories that totally get blown over. And you can allow them to get pushed to your phone. You can also just wait until you get into the app. But then you can categorize them based off of what type of stuff you want. And so then this type of stuff is what you're getting every day if you want, instead of going onto Facebook and getting the amount of the same story over and over.
Yep.
You can get the fun, different stories, the unique ones. And even these were hard to pick for us because we're like, we can only get 5. And these are the months we get 1 for each of them. And I know for me, there was a couple times where I'm like, there's like 3 really good stories for this month.
Yep.
What do I do? And so if you liked this, we'll do another one of these, maybe, every 6 months or so. It would be kind of fun. And if not, we are always doing these types of things on our Facebook and our Twitter. I try to make sure that we have posts going up there regularly that have different types of news stories. They're not all positive news stories, but they are environmental news stories. So follow us on those if you're not already. And lastly, we are very thankful for the support you guys have been giving us. I was just talking to somebody a little while ago about how they had found our podcast, and they were just absolutely loving it. So we really do appreciate the support you guys have been giving us, and we're going to keep moving forward, and we'll see you on the next episode.
We'll see you on the next episode.